Welcome to a journey that will take you deep into the heart of fear, self-doubt, and the struggle for inner peace. In tonight's story, the dark figure follows Sarah as she faces an unimaginable terror that lurks in the shadows of her own mind. What begins as a haunting presence in her yard slowly transforms into a confrontation with her deepest fears she has long kept buried. But fear isn't just something to run from, it's something to face, something to understand. Will Sarah conquer the darkness that has consumed her, or will it be the thing that ultimately defines her? Stay with us as we explore the chilling depths of the human mind, where the greatest battles are fought not in the world around us, but within ourselves. Sarah had always been drawn to the quiet, the solitude, and the peace that came with living on the outskirts of town. After a grueling few years in the city, working long hours as a marketing executive and enduring the never-ending noise, she needed an escape. The cottage, nestled on the edge of a small town with its vast front yard and encroaching forest, seemed like the perfect sanctuary. The house itself was old but full of charm, with ivy creeping up its brick walls and a wooden porch that creaked underfoot. It had been abandoned for a few months, and despite its age, the interior had been well maintained. The garden, however, was overgrown. Bushes were tangled with vines, flowers stood crooked and wild, and the grass was higher than it should have been. But to Sarah, it all felt like part of the charm. She felt a strange connection to the place. The moment she stepped inside, it was a crisp autumn evening when Sarah first noticed something strange. The air outside was chilly, the kind of coolness that brought the promise of winter, but it felt refreshing after the heat of the day. Sarah was in the kitchen, standing at the window and watching the fading light of dusk spill across the yard. She had just poured herself a steaming cup of chamomile tea, hoping the warmth would ease the tension in her shoulders. The peace of the place was exactly what she needed. Her eyes moved across the yard, the last of the golden light catching the trees that surrounded the property. A breeze swept through the branches, rustling the leaves and causing the branches to sway gently. Everything seemed calm and serene. Then she saw it at the far edge of the yard, near the tree line. Something stood still, an unnatural shape against the backdrop of the evening sky. It was tall, too tall to be a tree or any sort of animal. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, but when she blinked and rubbed her eyes, it was still there. A dark figure looming in the shadows, perfectly still, her heartbeat. Quicken, the figure was black, seemingly blending into the surrounding darkness, but it stood in stark contrast to the faint light from the setting sun. She strained her eyes, trying to make out any details, but it remained a silhouette, just a tall, imposing shape. Sarah frowned. She thought about the stories she'd heard from the locals when she first moved in. They had warned her that the woods around the cottage were full of mysteries. They spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences and things that went bump in the night. But she had brushed it off, chalking it up to superstitions, folklore passed down through generations. But now, as her eyes fixed on the figure in the yard, she felt a wave of unease. She turned away from the window, telling herself it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks on her. She set her tea down, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had crept into her chest. But as she walked away, something compelled her to look back. She went back to the window, her heart pounding in her chest, and looked out again. The figure hadn't moved. It was still there, standing in the same spot by the trees, its form even darker now as the sun dipped. Lower behind the horizon, the stillness was unnerving. And then, as if reacting to her gaze, the figure shifted slightly, Not an abrupt movement, but a subtle change, as though it had noticed her watching. A chill ran down her spine. She quickly closed the blinds. Heart racing, she told herself that it was probably just a trick of the light, or perhaps an animal, a deer, maybe standing still at the edge of the trees. But the thought of a deer that still unmoving in the yard at dusk seemed far-fetched. Walked around the house, trying to ignore the unease that had settled in her stomach. She checked the locks on the windows and doors, then sat down on the couch, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling, but her mind kept returning to the figure outside later that night. Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the covers pulled tight around her. The quiet of the cottage was almost suffocating, every small creak of the old wood under her settled nerves. She kept hearing the wind rustling through the trees outside, but the thought of the figure lingered. Was it just her imagination? She had seen it again, and that was enough to send her mind spiraling. She tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The dark figure of the man, or whatever it was, haunting her thoughts. She couldn't help but feel like it was waiting for something. Something beyond her understanding. The night stretched on, and Sarah finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep. But even as she closed her eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Something that had been watching her from the shadows the next few days. Felt like a blur for Sarah. The figure in the yard was never far from her. Thoughts haunting her every moment, even when the sun was high in the sky. She couldn't shake the image of its tall, shadowy form standing still at the edge of the trees, unmoving. The air around it had felt unnaturally cold, and the way it seemed to watch her unblinking, unwavering, disturbed her to her core. She told herself that it had been a trick of the light, or maybe even an overactive imagination, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. The fear gnawed at her, tugging at the edges of her rational mind, making it harder to focus on anything else. That night, after a long day of unpacking and settling in, Sarah forced herself to go outside. She needed to get out of her own head. The yard felt peaceful in the daylight, with the sun sinking low in the sky and casting a warm, golden hue over the wild garden. It should have been calming, but her eyes instinctively darted to the tree line, half expecting to see the figure. Standing there again for the first time since moving in, she felt a real sense of dread. As though the house was no longer her sanctuary, but a prison. The evening grew darker, and the chill of autumn settled into the air. Sarah sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to distract herself by reading, but her mind kept wandering. The wind whispered through the trees, and the silence of the yard felt heavier now, suffocating her. Suddenly, she looked up. It was there. Again the figure stood in the same spot as before, at the edge of the yard, partially obscured by the thick trees. But this time, it was closer. Her pulse quickened. She told herself it was just her imagination again, but the figure didn't move. It was no longer a mere silhouette. The form seemed darker, more defined, almost human in shape. Though far too tall to be natural, Sarah's throat tightened, and a cold sweat broke out along her spine. She should have gone inside, closed the door, locked herself away, but something in her couldn't stop watching it. Her body felt frozen, like the figure had some kind of control over her, like it was drawing her in with its presence. She tried to shake herself free from the trance-like state she was in. "It's nothing," she muttered under her breath. "Just a trick of the night." But the figure was not a trick. For the next few nights, the pattern repeated. The figure appeared in the yard without fail, each time closer than the last. At first, Sarah would try to dismiss it, telling herself that it was just a strange shadow cast by the trees, or maybe an animal standing still. But it didn't feel like that. Every time she looked away, it would inch closer. As though it was studying, Hershey began to feel like she was losing her grip on reality one night. Unable to take it any longer, Sarah stood at the window, staring at the spot where the figure had been standing earlier that evening. She had told herself she wouldn't look, but her curiosity won out. The figure was still there, but this time it wasn't at the edge of the yard. It was much closer, just a few feet from her porch. Her breath caught in her throat as she slowly backed away from the window, her pulse pounding in her ears. There was no mistaking it now. The figure was there, standing in the dark, staring at her, waiting. The shadows that had once seemed benign now felt like they were alive, suffocating the space around her. Sarah's legs felt like lead, and for a moment, she considered running out of the house, calling for help, but she knew deep down that no one would believe her. She had already tried telling her friends, but they had laughed it off. "It's probably just the woods playing tricks on you, Sarah," they'd said, brushing off her concerns. But this wasn't a trick. It couldn't be. She stood there, paralyzed with fear. The figure took a step forward, moving slowly toward her. Sarah's breath quickened and her heart hammered in her chest. Her hand trembled as it reached for the door handle, but it wasn't like she was about to leave. Something compelled her to open the door, to step outside and confront whatever this thing was. When the door creaked open, the cold night air rushed in, biting at her skin. The figure had not moved. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice barely. A whisper only response was the wind rustling through the trees. The yard, now shrouded in darkness, felt impossibly still. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to run, to get away, but she couldn't tear herself from the doorframe. It was like her feet were rooted to the ground, unwilling to let her move. Another step. The figure was closer now, its shadow stretching across the yard, blending with the darkness. It was like it was alive, moving toward her with purpose, yet still impossibly still. Her throat tightened, and a cold rush of panic surged through her. She slammed the door shut and locked it with trembling hands, backing away slowly, never taking her eyes off the window. She didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made her jump. The figure stayed in her mind, its presence a constant weight on her chest. When she tried to distract herself, her mind would drift back to the dark shape in the yard. The next day, Sarah spent hours on the phone with her friends, trying to explain what was happening, but their dismissals only deepened her unease. They told her it was nothing, just shadows, just the forest, just a figment of her overactive imagination. But Sarah knew better. That night, the figure appeared again, but this time it was closer than ever before. Sarah had begun to think that it wasn't just waiting for her to notice. It was waiting for something else, something more. She couldn't explain it, but the presence of the figure felt like it was becoming more than just a haunting. It felt like a countdown, like it was drawing closer with each passing day. And with each passing day, Sarah's fear grew stronger. The days after the last encounter with the dark figure felt like a nightmare. That wouldn't end. Sarah's mind was consumed with it, and every shadow, every flicker of movement in the corners of her vision seemed to be tied to the thing in her yard. She could no longer pretend that it was a trick of the light or just the imagination of an overworked mind. There was something real, something deeply unsettling about the presence outside her home. She avoided the window for the next few days, too afraid to look outside. But no matter how much she tried to shut it out, she couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that the figure was still out there, lurking in the dark. Every sound, every creak of the house seemed to carry its weight. It wasn't just in the yard anymore, it was in her mind. She tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned the house, reorganized her things, even tried reading, but nothing seemed to distract her. Each time she glanced out a window or went to the door, she felt that creeping fear, as though the figure was always waiting for her to look, to notice it. And every time she did, it moved closer. One evening, the sun had set earlier than usual, and Sarah decided to go for a walk. She knew she needed to clear her mind. She grabbed her jacket and stepped outside, breathing in the crisp autumn air. The night felt colder than usual, but that was to be expected. The leaves rustled in the trees as the wind picked up, and for a moment, it almost seemed normal. But as she walked further from the house, a nagging feeling began to settle in the pit of her stomach. The woods, which she had thought were beautiful and serene, now felt oppressive, as though something was watching her, following her every step. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and a chill ran through her bones. She quickened her pace, but the feeling didn't fade. Her footsteps were the only sound in the silence of the night, until a soft, eerie noise broke through something, faint but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves. Sarah froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned around quickly, expecting to see someone following her, but there was no one there. The woods were empty, the trees standing still in the moonlight. Her breath came in quick gasps, and she felt the weight of the darkness press in around her. It wasn't just the figure anymore. It was something more sinister. A sudden gust of wind sent a shiver down her spine, and she heard the footsteps again. This time, they were closer, louder. She turned to face the sound, but all she could see was the dense forest. The footsteps stopped, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the air. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. At the far edge of the clearing, just beyond the trees, there was a shadow standing still, too tall, too unnatural. The figure, the dark shape, was back. It was closer than it had ever been before. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she took a step back. The figure didn't move, but it felt like it was drawing her in. She couldn't move, couldn't look away, as if it had some kind of magnetic pull on her dot. Without thinking, she turned and ran. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled through the underbrush. The ground beneath her feet uneven, making it harder to keep her balance. The shadows seemed to stretch and grow, the trees closing in around her, but she couldn't stop. She had to get away from the figure. But the sound of footsteps behind her told her she wasn't alone. She could hear them getting closer, heavy, deliberate steps, as if it was following her every move. She glanced over her shoulder, but all she saw were the trees, the darkness, and the oppressive silence. She kept running, pushing herself harder, feeling the cold sweat on her brow and the panic rising in her throat. Finally, she burst out of the woods, panting heavily as she stumbled onto the familiar path that led to her house. She could see the silhouette of the cottage in the distance, its lights flickering through the windows, a small beacon of safety. But when she looked back, the figure was there. It was standing at the edge of the woods, watching her, its shape defined now in the dim light of the street lamps. It hadn't moved, but its presence was suffocating. The distance between them felt like nothing, even though the yard separated her from it. Her pulse raced, and her legs felt weak as she reached the door. She fumbled with the keys, almost dropping them, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Finally, She managed to unlock the door and slammed it shut behind her. She leaned against it, gasping for breath, her chest heaving with the effort of the run. The silence of the house felt deafening as she sank to the floor, her back pressed against the door. She tried to steady her breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had seen it, she knew she had seen the figure, and it had followed her. But why? Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of everything began to hit her. The house felt colder now, the shadows more oppressive. Her mind raced as she tried to reason with herself. It's not real, it can't be real. This is just fear. It's just my imagination. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. The figure was real, and it was coming for her. The following days passed in a haze of sleepless nights and mounting dread. Sarah couldn't escape the sense of being watched. The figure's presence had grown undeniable each day. Each night, it seemed to inch closer, until it was no longer just an odd shadow. In the yard, it was now an ominous part of her daily existence. Her mind raced constantly, a carousel of questions and fears. Was she losing her sanity? Was this a manifestation of stress, or was there something truly malevolent at work? The encounter in the woods haunted her thoughts. She had never felt more vulnerable, more powerless. Each time she tried to shake the fear, it only grew stronger, like a parasite feeding on her anxiety. But what terrified her the most wasn't just the figure. Anymore, it was the feeling of inevitability that had settled deep within her chest. It was as if the darkness was closing in, and no matter how fast she ran, it would always catch her. One evening, as dusk descended upon the house, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't keep living in fear, cowering from something she couldn't explain. She had to confront it, whatever it was, as the sun sank lower. Casting long shadows across the yard, Sarah found herself standing at the window, staring out at the now familiar spot where the figure had always appeared. Her heartbeat was loud. In her ears, each thud like the ticking of a clock, counting down to an inevitable moment. There was a strange stillness in the air, a quiet that felt heavy. No rustling of leaves, no chirping of birds, just the soft, steady hum of her own breath. She could almost feel the figure there, even though she couldn't see it. Sarah's hand shook as she pulled the blinds open just slightly, her eyes scanning. The yard, the trees loomed large and ominous in the dying light, but she couldn't see the figure at first. For a brief moment, relief flooded her. Maybe tonight it wasn't there, but then she saw it. There, standing just past the tree line, was the dark shape, taller than the surrounding trees, its form impossibly still. The outline of its figure was barely visible in the twilight, but she could feel it, the same suffocating presence that had haunted her for days. Her breath hitched. It was there, just like it always was. Closer too, with a sudden surge of determination, Sarah grabbed her jacket and rushed out the door. She wasn't going to run this time. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to wait for it to come to her this time. She was going to confront whatever it was. The air outside was cold, and as she stepped onto the porch, she could feel the chill seeping into her bones. The house, once her refuge, now felt like a cage she could never escape from. She turned to face the yard, heart pounding as the wind whispered through the trees. The figure remained motionless, its shape becoming clearer as Sarah stepped off the porch and onto the grass. Each step she took felt heavier, like the ground itself was resisting her movement. The figure didn't move. It simply watched. Her pulse quickened as she crossed the yard, closer and closer to the figure that had haunted her for so long. She could see the outline of its features, now dark and unnaturally elongated. The air felt colder the closer she got, and the shadows seemed to deepen around it. She had never seen anything like it, but at that moment, it didn't matter. She had come too far to turn back now. When she was just a few feet away, the figure moved. It wasn't a sudden lunge, nor a menacing gesture, simply took a slow, deliberate step forward. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble with its movement, and the air grew thicker, heavier with a kind of unspoken pressure. Sarah stopped in her tracks. Fear gripped her chest, but she forced herself to stay still. She could feel the weight of the figure's presence pressing down on her, like it was reaching into her very soul. "Who are you?" Sarah's voice trembled, but she made herself speak. She wasn't sure if it was an entity, a spirit, or something far worse, but it was there, and it was waiting for her. The figure did not respond. It didn't speak, didn't move, except for that slow step forward. She took another step toward it. "What do you want from me?" This time, she didn't just feel the figure's presence. She felt its eyes know, its gaze upon her. Something cold, something ancient and filled with hunger. A pressure, like 1,000 unseen eyes, weighing on her every word. It wasn't merely watching her. It was listening. She felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't just looking at a figure. This was a manifestation of something deeper, something born from the darkest parts of her fears. It was a part of her. A realization struck her like a bolt of lightning, and she gasped, "You're me, aren't you?" The figure did not respond, but its presence seemed to grow, intensifying. It stood there, just beyond the reach of the dim light from her porch, waiting for her to understand. The truth hit her like a tidal wave. The figure wasn't a stranger, a threat from the outside world. It was a reflection of everything she had buried deep within herself. Every fear, every regret, every insecurity. It had been growing, lurking in the corners of her mind, feeding off her doubts and anxieties. It had taken shape in the darkness of her yard, growing stronger each time she looked away, each time she tried to ignore it. It was her deepest, darkest fears made manifest, watching her, waiting for her to face them. With this realization, the overwhelming fear she had carried for so long shifted into something else, something sharp and raw, but filled with clarity. She understood now. She wasn't dealing with a haunting. She was dealing with herself. "You want me to face you," Sarah said softly, almost as a whisper. "You want me to confront everything I've been running from." The figure did not answer, but it seemed to grow even darker, the shadows around it expanding. "I will," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "I'll face you." At that moment, everything in her shifted. The figure wasn't her enemy. It wasn't something to run from, to hide from. It was a part of her, and if she was going to truly be free of it, she needed to face it head on. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward. The figure did not retreat, nor did it strike. It simply stood there, a towering, unyielding presence. But Sarah didn't stop. With each step, her fear began to dissipate, replaced by an undeniable strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She wasn't afraid anymore. She understood what it was, and she was ready to confront it. The figure took a step back, almost as though it was retreating. Its presence weakening, Sarah stepped forward once more, her heart calm, her mind clear. For the first time, the figure did not draw closer. It didn't move at all. Sarah stood in the yard, her heart racing as the figure, now a part of her, lingered in the shadows. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness. But for the first time since her terrifying ordeal had begun, Sarah didn't feel as though she were in danger. The dark figure that had tormented her for so long was not an outside force, was a reflection of herself. Every fear, every regret, every doubt had taken shape, and it had grown stronger the more she ignored it. But now she had come to face it. Her breath came slow and steady as she stood before it, no longer trembling. She had found the courage to approach, to look this manifestation of her deepest fears directly in the eye. The figure remained silent, unmoving, almost as if waiting for her to do the next thing. It wasn't like before. There was no hunger in the air, no chilling sense of impending doom. Instead, there was a quiet, suffocating understanding between them. Sarah could feel that the figure wasn't going to harm her, wasn't about violence or aggression, it was about the confrontation she had avoided for so long. The figure remained there, tall and shadowy, but something in Sarah had shifted. It was as though, in standing there, she was reclaiming control, pushing through the barriers of fear that had clouded her mind for so long. "Why did you come here?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. Her words hung in the cold air, seemingly absorbed by the night itself. The figure did not respond. Instead, it took another step closer, its form stretching impossibly tall, its edges blending with the surrounding shadows. Sarah didn't flinch. The weight of its presence, which had once paralyzed her, no longer carried the same power. She knew now that the figure was not her enemy. It was simply a projection of everything she had avoided, the culmination of her innermost fears. It had no power over her except what she had given it. With this realization came another, deeper one. The figure wasn't just a manifestation of fear, it was a reflection of everything she had hidden from herself, from the parts of her life she had ignored, the parts of herself she had not wanted to confront. She had been running from it all, but now she knew that she could not outrun it forever. As she took another step toward it, the figure seemed to waver, its shape flickering between shadows and light, as though uncertain of its form. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "You're me. I've been hiding from myself." For the first time, the figure seemed to move its shadow, shifting, stretching as if to envelop her. But Sarah didn't retreat. Instead, she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she extended it toward the figure. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of understanding and acceptance. She had spent so long avoiding it, so long trying to forget the things that terrified her, the mistakes she'd made, the people she had hurt, the loneliness she felt. She had buried those parts of herself in the deepest corners of her mind, never once daring to look them in the face. But now, standing in the yard, facing the figure, she could feel a deep, overwhelming sense of clarity. She wasn't just confronting an external threat, she was finally facing herself. The figure seemed to falter, its dark form stretching, then contracting, like a shadow being torn at the seams. And as Sarah stepped closer, she could see it more clearly. It wasn't just fear, it was guilt, regret, pain, all rolled into one. The shadows of the past were not just memories, they were her. And as she reached out toward it, they began to dissipate, fading away like mist in the light of day. The moment Sarah's hand made contact with the figure's shadowy form, the yard was filled with an almost overwhelming sense of calm. The tension that had built up over days, weeks, months, was gone. The figure, no longer a fearsome presence, simply stood there, silent and still. The weight of it, the suffocating darkness, lifted. "I've been afraid of you," Sarah whispered, "but now I know you're not here to harm me. You're part of me. You've always been." As the words left her lips, the figure began to melt away, its dark edges disintegrating into the air like smoke dissipating in the wind. It was slow at first, the darkness clinging to the yard, but gradually it started to fade, vanishing into the night. Sarah stood there, motionless, watching the form dissolve, until there was nothing left but the cool, quiet air of the evening. The yard was calm now. The trees stood still, their shadows long and quiet in the soft light of the moon. The oppressive feeling that had gripped her for so long was gone. Sarah felt light, almost weightless, as if a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The air felt lighter now, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from Sarah's shoulders. Standing in her yard, under the gentle glow of the moon, she could feel the stillness around her. The oppressive fear, the shadowy figure that had tormented her, had vanished. It was as though it had never existed, or at least not in the form she had once feared. Sarah took a slow, deliberate breath, savoring the calm. The winds had quieted. The rustling of leaves no longer felt like ominous whispers, but gentle sounds of nature. The world around her, which had once seemed so dark, now felt vibrant, alive, and full of possibility. It was as though she had been freed from a prison she had not even known she was trapped in. For the first time in what felt like months, Sarah allowed herself to feel hope, to feel the weight of peace settle over her. It wasn't the kind of relief that came from simply escaping a threat. It was the kind that came from confronting the truth, from standing in the face of her own fears and realizing that they could no longer control her. As Sarah stood in the yard, still absorbing the profound shift in her mind, she heard a soft rustle behind her. For a moment, panic gripped her heart, the old fear creeping back up her spine. But she shook her head. The figure was gone. She had faced it, and it had dissolved. Turning slowly, she looked over her shoulder. There, standing at the edge of the porch, was an old woman. Her hair was silver, pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore a simple dress that seemed to shimmer with a light of its own. Her presence wasn't threatening, no. It was calm, almost serene. The woman's face was gentle, her eyes deep pools of wisdom. She had a quiet strength about her, the kind of strength Sarah had always hoped to possess, but had never felt she had. The woman smiled softly, as if she had been waiting for Sarah to turn and see her. "You've done well," she said, her voice warm and soothing, like a lullaby. Sarah's mind spun. She had no idea who this woman was or how she had appeared in the yard. She wanted to ask, but the woman raised a hand, as if to say she would explain everything in time. "You are no longer bound by your fears." The woman continued, her voice filling the space around Sarah like a gentle breeze. "What you faced was never about an external force. It was about you. Your strength, your resilience, your willingness to confront what you have long avoided." Sarah felt the tears start to well up in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't understand. She had never seen this woman before, yet she felt an undeniable sense of recognition, as though she had always known her. "Who are you?" Sarah finally managed to ask, her voice shaky but strong. The woman's smile deepened, and she took a step forward, her presence exuding a quiet grace. "I am the reflection of the strength you have inside yourself," she said gently. "I am the part of you that has always known the truth, even when you were too afraid to face it." Sarah blinked, trying to process the words. This woman ... was part of her, a manifestation of her inner strength. It didn't make sense, but something deep within her recognized the truth in the woman's words. You were never meant to be trapped in your fear, the woman continued, but you had to see it for yourself. The figure that darkness it was never something outside of you. It was always part of you. And now that you have faced it, now that you've acknowledged it, you can finally let go. The woman's eyes sparkled, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw a flicker of something familiar, something that had always been there, hidden just beneath the surface. It was a warmth, a power, something that had been locked away for too long. How? Sarah asked, her voice filled with wonder. How do I let go of it? How do I move on? The woman's expression softened. It's already done. You have already begun. The fear, the darkness, it no longer holds you. It was never meant to, but you had to face it, to accept it. Now you can choose to release it. Completely, Sarah's heart swelled. She felt the truth of the woman's words deep in her chest, like a weight lifting, like a door opening that had always been closed. Thank you, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The woman nodded, her smile radiant. No, thank you. She stepped back, her form beginning to fade, the air around her shimmering as though she were becoming part of the night itself before Sarah could say anything else. The woman disappeared completely, leaving nothing but the soft rustling of leaves. In the wind, Sarah stood there, rooted to the spot, her heart racing with a mixture of disbelief and understanding. It was over, the fear, the darkness, the figure. They were all gone, but as Sarah stood there, breathing in the cool night air, she realized that something had changed within her. She wasn't just free from the terror that had haunted her for so long. She was free from the limitations she had imposed on herself, from the cage of fear and doubt she had built around her life for the first time. Sarah felt as though she could finally live, truly live without the shadow of her own fears holding her back. The moon hung high in the sky, its light soft and comforting. The yard around her was calm, the once oppressive darkness, now just a quiet night in the woods. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and Sarah could hear the distant sound of owls calling from the forest. She closed her eyes, letting the peacefulness of the moment wash over her hand. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly free. The night was silent, but not the kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and suffocating. This was a peaceful silence, the kind that comes with a world at rest. The trees around Sarah's cottage swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling softly as though they, too, were finally at ease. The sky above her was clear, the moon now high and full, casting a soft, calming glow over the yard. For the first time in what felt like forever, the yard no longer felt like a prison. It felt like home. Sarah took a deep breath, closing her eyes as the cool night air filled her lungs. It was different now. Everything was different. Her mind was clear, no longer clouded by fear, guilt, or anxiety. She had faced the darkness within herself, confronted her deepest fears, and emerged on the other side stronger than she had ever been. She opened her eyes and gazed at the world around her. The figure, the shadow that had haunted her so relentlessly, was gone. The heavy, oppressive air that had once surrounded her home had lifted. It was as if the universe itself had exhaled, leaving only peace in its wake. But Sarah knew this wasn't just a passing moment. This was a new beginning. Her heart felt lighter, as though it had shed years of accumulated weight. She didn't just feel free of the figure. She felt free of the limitations she had placed on herself, the walls she had built around her own heart. She wasn't just letting go of her fears. She was embracing the fullness of life, the possibility of what came next. There was so much more to discover, and for the first time, she felt ready to experience it all. As Sarah stood there, looking at the now tranquil yard, a soft voice broke through the stillness. Asterisk, you've done it. The voice said, startled. Sarah turned toward the sound. The woman, the one who had appeared to her in the yard just a few nights ago, was standing at the edge of the porch once again. She was no longer a shadow or a mysterious apparition, but a comforting presence. Her silver hair gleamed softly in the moonlight, and the warm, knowing smile on her face spoke of wisdom and understanding. You're free now, the woman said. Gently I am, Sarah whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of relief, of joy, not fear. The woman nodded. You've faced the darkness within yourself. You've confronted the deepest parts of who you are, and you've chosen to release the past. Now you stand at the threshold of something new, something brighter. Sarah smiled, the weight in her chest lifting even further. I can't believe it's really over. I thought I would never be free of that fear. That shadow it had consumed a myth wasn't the shadow that consumed you, the woman said softly, stepping closer. It was the fear of confronting it, the fear of acknowledging it. But now you've made peace with it. You've let it go. Sarah nodded, feeling a deep sense of understanding. She had spent so much of her life avoiding the difficult emotions, the painful truths. She had run from her fears, buried them deep within her, believing that if she didn't acknowledge them, they would simply fade away. But now she knew that confronting them was the only way to truly be free. You found your strength, the woman continued, the strength to stand tall, to face the darkness, and to walk through it. And now you are free to choose the life that awaits you. I never thought I had the strength, Sarah admitted, her voice quiet, but filled with conviction. But I do, don't I? I don't need to be afraid anymore. The woman's smile deepened, a look of pride in her eyes. No, you don't need to be afraid. You've learned the most important lesson of all, that you are the master of your own destiny. Your fears don't define you. You define you. Sarah took a deep breath, letting the woman's words settle deep within her. The freedom she felt wasn't just physical or emotional, it was spiritual. She felt connected to something larger than herself, to the universe, to the world around her. She felt like she was finally in control of her life, finally free to move forward and embrace whatever came next. The woman took a step back, her form beginning to fade as the night deepened. It's time for me to go now, she said, her voice calm and reassuring. But know that I am always a part of you, just as you are a part of me. You will carry this strength with you always. Sarah nodded, watching as the woman's form disappeared into the night, her presence lingering only as a warm feeling in Sarah's heart. It was as though a part of the woman had become part of Sarah, something that would always remain with her. For a moment, Sarah stood still, absorbing the quiet beauty of the world around her. The breeze whispered through the trees, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something new to begin. Was then that she realized her journey was far from over. The figure was gone, but the world was full of new possibilities, new opportunities to grow, to heal, to explore. She had faced her darkest fears, and now she was free to step into the light. The first step was always the hardest, but Sarah had taken it. And now, as she stood in her yard, surrounded by the peaceful night, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next. Sarah walked inside the house, her footsteps light and purposeful. She closed the door behind her, the weight of the past finally lifting off her shoulders. She walked into the living room, where the moonlight spilled through the windows, casting gentle shadows across the floor. Everything felt new, like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with whatever she chose, with a smile on her face. Sarah sat down by the window, watching the night unfold in front of her. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. The morning after, Sarah's encounter with the woman after the release of her deepest fears arrived with the kind of quiet calm she hadn't known was possible. The world felt fresh, as though she had stepped into a new version of reality. Everything around her, the trees in her yard, the crispness in the air, even the sunlight streaming through the windows, felt vivid and alive in a way she had never experienced before. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and she was seeing the world with new eyes. Sarah stood by the window, gazing out at the landscape. The trees, now shedding their leaves for the fall, were vibrant with color. Birds chirped in the distance, and the wind gently rustled the branches, carrying with it the earthy scent of the forest. It was peaceful calm. Yes, but it was also full of possibility. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took it all in, the light shifting in the sky. It felt strange, this sense of clarity. The weight she had carried for so long had dissipated. But it wasn't just an absence, it was the presence of something new, something that had been buried beneath the layers of fear and doubt. A sense of purpose. She had been running from herself for years, trying to outrun her pain, her guilt, her fears. But now, standing in her home, in this very moment, she realized that the world around her was no longer something to be afraid of. The world was hers to explore, to shape, and to experience. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped away from the window and walked to the front door, opening it with a sense of determination. The air felt different now, cooler, clearer, but not intimidating. She stepped out into the yard, her bare feet brushing against the dewy grass, the sensation grounding her in the present. For the first time in years, she felt completely present, in her own body, in her own life. It was liberating, like she was rediscovering the world around her and herself. She hadn't been truly awake, truly alive, for so long. But now, she was awake, and it felt like everything had shifted. As she walked across the yard, she could hear the faint crunch of leaves beneath her feet. Her gaze fell on the spot where the dark figure had stood so many times before. The area was empty now, devoid of any trace of the terror it had once carried. Sarah smiled softly, a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. That place, once filled with fear, had been transformed into a symbol of her strength, of her ability to face what had once seemed insurmountable. Turning back toward the house, Sarah paused on the porch and looked up at the sky. The clouds were drifting lazily, bathed in the soft light of early morning. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the wind wash over her face. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for her journey, for the lessons she had learned, for the strength she had discovered within herself. It wasn't just about overcoming fear anymore. It was about embracing life, all of it, the joy, the pain, the challenges, and the triumphs. Life was a path, not a destination. She had been so focused on the end goal, on finding the solution, that she had forgotten the beauty of simply walking. The path of being present with every step she took. And now she realized she was ready to walk that path. The path forward. Later, as the day unfolded, Sarah spent time in the house, moving through it with a sense of purpose. She took a long, thoughtful look at the place that had been her refuge and her prison. The walls that had once felt like they were closing in on her now felt like a sanctuary, her sanctuary. The clutter she had accumulated over the months was no longer overwhelming. It was simply her life, her belongings, the things she had chosen to surround herself with. She organized her bookshelves, picked up the scattered items on her desk, and tidied up the kitchen with a newfound sense of calm. Every movement she made felt deliberate and fulfilling. It wasn't about perfection. It was about enjoying the process of creating space for herself, of curating the environment she wanted to live in. When she stepped outside again later, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the world. She walked down the path, beyond the yard, into the woods. The trees towered over her, their leaves rustling in the wind, the underbrush thick with life. It was a familiar path she had walked many times before, but it felt different now, more expansive, more open. As she ventured further, she found herself thinking about the future, not in the anxious way she once did, filled with worry about the unknown, but with curiosity and excitement. There were so many things she had left unexplored, so many possibilities. She wasn't bound by fear anymore. She wasn't bound by anything at the heart of the forest. Sarah paused, standing beneath the canopy of trees. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of nature around her, the whispering wind, the calls of birds in the distance, the rustling of leaves beneath her feet. Everything was still, yet full of life. Everything felt in perfect balance. Soft smile spread across her face as she opened her eyes and looked up at the sky. The sun had nearly set, painting the horizon with deep oranges and purples. It was beautiful in its quiet way, much like her journey had been. Slow, steady, and filled with moments of discovery. She didn't know what the future held. There were still challenges to face, still fears to overcome, but she was no longer afraid. She had faced the hardest battle of all, the battle against herself, and had come out victorious. The path ahead was hers to walk. And for the first time, Sarah truly believed she could handle whatever it brought. Later that evening, that night, Sarah sat by the window again, watching the stars appear in the vast expanse of the sky. She was no longer searching for something to fill the void inside her. There was no void anymore. She was whole. For the first time in her life, she felt complete. Not because she had fixed herself, but because she had accepted herself, every part of her. The darkness had not defeated her. She had embraced it, learned from it, and in doing so, had transformed it into something beautiful. The house was quiet. The yard, once filled with shadow, was now bathed in the soft glow of the moon. It was peaceful. It was hers on. Sarah knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning of her new life. The future was unknown, but for the first time, she felt prepared for it. Whatever came next, she would face it with strength, with grace, and with an open heart. The darkness was gone. The light had returned, and with that light came a new path, a path of her own making. ****. Sarah's journey was not just about overcoming a dark figure in her yard, but about confronting the darkness within. As she learned, it is through facing our deepest fears that we truly find our strength. This story reminds us that no fear, no matter how daunting, can last forever. The path to freedom begins when we stop running and start understanding. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found peace in Sarah's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of courage, transformation, and the human spirit. Until next time, remember, the greatest power lies in facing your fears and walking through them, not around them. Good night, sleep well.